Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, I guess, to all of you out there. But first and foremost, welcome back, and also welcome to those of you who have just joined the 2020 Prime Global Forum right now. When we realized some months ago that we had to take this conference from a physical New York event to an online global event, we speculated which online platform to use. Global Compact offered that we could use their lease for the hop-in, which we are on right now. And I have to say that I'm very happy that we decided to accept this offer, because today I realized that the Global Forum has had more than 1,000 participants, which is indeed more than many of the other platforms will be able to host. So this is indeed the largest Prime event ever support. This is the third and final part of the conference. We've had two fabulous first parts and speakers and moderators from all around the world. We've launched the Prime Blueprint for SDG integration, and we've had deans, professors, students, business leaders, UN delegates from 7 continents of the world participating in this conference. We've had discussions about visions, it's been about aspirations, hopes for the future, but it has also been very concrete ideas and exchanges of knowledge of how can we actually think about and do management education into the future. Today, in this third part of the conference, we will continue these dialogues as we have prominent and distinguished speakers from academia, business, media, ranking, accreditation, and leadership development institutions to inspire our dialogue. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, here at the Global Forum, let me just add that if you miss out on a session or two, don't worry. All sessions have been recorded and will be made available via the Prime website, which, by the way, has just been, within the last weeks, had a soft launch of its new face before we finally release it shortly. So now to our keynote speaker of 2020 Prime Global Forum. It is my privilege to introduce to you Professor Andy Hoffman, here with me in the virtual space of reality. He is the Holcim Professor of Sustainable Enterprise, University of Michigan in the United States of America. He's an expert in environmental pollution, with a particular focus on exploring the processes where environmental issues both emerge as social, political, and managerial issues. Andy has been awarded numerous awards globally and honorary titles, and published many books and more than 100 articles and book chapters on these issues. Today, Andy, I am totally delighted to invite you to the scene here to talk about re-examining management in Anthropocene Society, a call for systems change. A warm welcome to the Prime scene.
Thank you very much, Mette. It's truly an honor to be here. I'm very excited to offer some of my thoughts and hopefully advance the conversation taking place here about the role of business, the role of business education. Advanced look at my slides there. Sorry about that. And I think, as the title says, a call for systems change. And I think that's a key here. We do have an opportunity right now in the midst of this COVID crisis to start to think about how do we do business differently? How do we do business education differently? To start my remarks, I want to start with a story, and it's a story that happened to me in 2005. I had just joined the University of Michigan Business School. It wasn't called Ross at the time. And in 2005, an event occurred that really caught my attention. And that is that Bernie Ebbers had been sentenced to prison. Bernie Ebbers was the CEO of WorldCom. He was somebody that we would want all our students to become. He had started a company from scratch and built it into a global powerhouse, a multinational, and yet he was disgraced. He had been convicted of securities fraud and false filing with the SEC, and he was sentenced to prison for 24 years. And to my surprise, no one in the building was talking about it. I was really struck by this. And finally, towards the end of the day, I got on the elevator. I was a new professor. No one knew who I was. And there were 2 senior professors in front of me. And one turned to the other and said, "What do you think of that Bernie Ebbers sentence?" The other one turned to him and said, "I think it's ridiculous. It's not like he killed somebody." And I've always thought about that story. I've always thought about that line, because to my mind, it is like he killed somebody. People lost their jobs, they lost their investment, they lost their retirement account. He really damaged a lot of people's lives. And the point of this story, to my mind, is the extent to which we in society and in business schools recognize that people in business have tremendous power, but we don't hold them responsible for the power that they yield. And so my first point I'd like to make today is that management education has to catch up to that. We are training students who have tremendous power in society, and with tremendous power comes tremendous responsibility. And so when we think about systems change, I'd like to offer that thought and then build on it. Because while it was true in 2005, it's even more true today. Scientists have proposed we've entered the Anthropocene. We've entered a new geological epoch, one not seen by humanity in its entire history. Rather than just polluting the environment, offering insults to the environment, we as a species are now changing the ecosystems. We are changing the systems of the Earth. This is I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but there are the planetary boundaries, and that green is that blue line next to the green is a boundary beyond which we should not go if we want to maintain a safe operating space for humans and other life forms. And we are crossing 4 of them: climate change, biosphere integrity, land system change, and biogeochemical flows, nitrogen and phosphorus. Now, why are we crossing these? We're crossing these because of the market. We're crossing these because of human population. When I was born in 1961, there were 3 billion people on Earth. Today, in my short lifetime, there are 7.5 billion. And then, God willing, by 2050, I will see the population reach 10 billion people. And a market that makes that possible, but a market that also increases consumption, demands on the ecosystem, and as these planetary boundaries describe, we are changing the world around us. In fact, some have suggested it should not be called the Anthropocene, it should be called the Capitalocene, to sort of put the onus on the fact that capitalism has made this happen. Now, we have a range of futures in front of us when we start to think about the Anthropocene. We can have a dystopian future or a utopian future or something in between. And my colleague Deb Jennings and I have written about this, and we've described one end as collapsing systems and the other end as re-enlightenment, a shift akin to the Enlightenment, a shift in our thinking about who we are as a species, what the environment is around us, and how the two are connected. The interesting thing about the Enlightenment as a metaphor, in the Enlightenment, we went from seeing humans as subsumed by the environment to now seeing that we can treat the environment as something we can take apart, reassemble, tinker with a metaphor like a machine. And now in re-enlightenment, we have to recognize that that model doesn't work anymore. And we have to start to think differently. And that really speaks to changing the systems by recognizing that we're in a new normal. Something is different here. Now, another interesting thing about the Enlightenment is that we didn't have something called the market. We didn't have the corporate sector. And so while it's fair to say that the market, capitalism, the corporate sector has brought about the Anthropocene, I would also posit that we can't adapt to it and lead towards that utopian future without the market. The market is the most powerful institution on Earth. Business is the most powerful entity within it. If business isn't creating the solutions to climate change and the other issues within the Anthropocene, they will not be found. Business creates the buildings we live and work in, the clothes we wear, the food we eat, the drugs we take to extend our lives, the forms of mobility we enjoy, the powertrain under the hood of that form of mobility. All of that comes from the market sector. And if business isn't solving this, quite simply, it will not be solved. And so with that as a beginning, there is the charge. How do we change our systems to move away from a dystopian future, which you can see examples of today, towards a more utopian future, which you can also see examples of today? And to my mind, COVID-19 is a test for how we will respond as a society to the collective challenge that the Anthropocene provides. Will we work together on a collective problem and adopt a mindset of every man for himself? Will we trust science and the government, or prefer some variant of what has been coded as freedom, the freedom not to wear a mask, the freedom to not socially distance? Will we trust science and the government? Will we snap back to where we were before? There's already pressures right now to say, you know what, when this is done, when COVID is done, we'll go right back to where we were before. And we can't do that. We are in the middle of a chaotic shift We are in the middle of a period of chaos. Change happens during periods of chaos. Change only happens if people come out and call it what it is and call for a new future going forward. And that's the responsibility, I think, of everybody on this call, everybody in business schools, to start to articulate a new future, recognizing the new normal. And how do we go forward from that to develop a better system of markets, a better system of capitalism, not throwing capitalism out, adapting capitalism, make it shift. Now, we have a benefit because that conversation was engaged before COVID came along. Right off the top there, Paul Pullman, who is going to wrap up our session today, has called capitalism a damaged ideology that needs to be reinvented for the 21st century. Joseph Stiglitz, a Nobel laureate in economics, capitalism is in need of being saved from itself. I could walk down all these quotes, and there's many, many more. Leaders of business, titans of business, are calling for change, recognizing that we've got a problem and we need to fix it. And that last line, our young people are ready for it. The students in my classroom are ready for it. Young people are becoming more enamored with socialism, disenchanted with capitalism. Again, I'm not here to advocate for socialism over capitalism. I'm here to advocate for a shift in capitalism, an adjustment. And that's what I think a lot of people here are talking about. Not throwing capitalism away, but fixing it. And if we don't have that conversation with business schools, who's going to have it? Now, why is this conversation taking place? It's taking place because the market has failed in the natural environment and the market has failed in the social environment. In the natural environment, we've got climate change and the market seems unable or unwilling to adapt and address it, but there are glimmers of hope that there's change. Failures in the social market, income inequality has reached epidemic proportions, dangerous proportions. I look at the COVID crisis and I think of a statistic that came out from the US federal government last year that said that 40% of Americans could not pull together $400 in emergency. That was scary then, it's terrifying now because we're in that emergency. Almost half of Americans are in serious financial trouble, and that should scare anyone. Joseph Stiglitz is talking about income inequality as being a danger at dangerous levels for the stability of society. That's what we're facing. And capitalism is doing that, and capitalism needs to change. Again, Joseph Stiglitz says income inequality is a choice. It's a choice based on our policies, both at the government level and at the corporate level, and we can choose otherwise and start to shift them. And there, the business school can start to step in and engage that conversation. And I would add that we have help because that conversation, again, has been engaged within the business sector. BlackRock, Business Roundtable, World Economic Forum, all coming forward and saying, okay, the purpose of the corporation is not simply to make money for its shareholder. That has been destructive for our society. That creates a selfish, as Jim Gamble says, a sociopathic idea within corporations that we only care about ourselves with no regard to those around us. And the World Economic Forum came out and said, corporations are there to serve society, support communities, pay its fair share of taxes, act as a steward of the environment and the material universe for future generations. With these words, we can begin the process of re-examining capitalism, what it is, where it's going, what it needs to be. Too many of our students think that capitalism is just a given, like a law of nature. It is not. It is a set of human institutions designed by humans to serve humans, and it is quite malleable and it is quite diverse. Norwegian capitalism is different than American capitalism, different than Japanese capitalism, and it has changed over time, and it's a set of rules that we accept. You can't price fix, you can't collude, you can't emit CO2, you can't destroy the global climate, you can't take advantage of your workers. These are all adjustments we can make within the capitalist system to start to think differently about the role of business in society. I like to think about it this way. We have to shift from a present focus on reducing unsustainability, which is really about fitting sustainability within the existing business logics, to creating sustainability, which is about changing the systems by which our market works. A nice analogy is stopping war versus creating peace. In Iraq, the United States stopped the war. Then we're finding out that it's a very different process to create peace. It's a totally different way of thinking. And so if we're going to change a system, we have to get down to the foundational level of how we think. To put it in business terms, it's about going from reducing greenhouse gases, which is actually quite simple within the existing models, to going carbon neutral or even going carbon negative. And that requires an engagement of a whole different approach of thinking. And I am struck and I am excited and I am hopeful because I thought that carbon neutral and especially carbon negative would remain a theoretical construct for years to come. And instead, it's been engaged. On the right, we have businesses that have set up target, or Marks and Spencer says it's already there, to become carbon neutral. We have IKEA and Microsoft that have set a target to be carbon negative. We have countries that are setting carbon neutral targets. And then on the left, we have financial instruments, financial institutions that are divesting from fossil fuels. Most ironically, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund that made all their money from the Standard Oil Trust, and now they're getting out of oil. I just find this fascinating and exciting that here, as we start to think about re-enlightenment, start to think about shifting systems, business is there, at least some of them, to trying to find the way forward. We need to build on this, and we need to bring it into the business school. We need to re-examine business education. And I applaud Prime for being a step in that direction. There are others as well, the Aspen Institute, RRBM, other examples of attempts to try and shift the logics within business schools to start to become a change agent, a force for good, a way to bring our systems into that more utopian future within the Anthropocene. Business schools have to lead the way, and I'm finding my students are hungry for it. So I'd like to offer a few thoughts before closing on what I would like to see and what I envision for Reexamining Business School. To begin, I think we need to start to teach students to examine capitalism and become stewards of the market and not just take it for granted. Rebecca Henderson has a course at Harvard called Reexamining Capitalism, and the students have clamored for it. I taught a course this past winter called Business and Democracy, Advocacy, Lobbying, and the Public Interest, and it was oversubscribed, a first-time offering. And the students said they're really hungry for content like this because 20 years ago, students went into business school to make themselves rich. And if they wanted to change the world, they went into schools of government or nonprofit management. Today's students are going to business schools to try and make the world a better place, to re-examine the role of business in society. That gives me hope. And we need to feed those students. And the first step, don't teach them just to accept the market as it is. Teach them to understand the market, how it came to be, how it can change, what other forms are out there, so that they can play a role in making the market what it needs to be as they start to adopt the responsibility and the power that they have as business leaders. Second, examine a balanced role of government in the market and business and democracy. Too many of my students think that government is an unwarranted intrusion in the market. It has no role in the market. And they look at lobbying as gamesmanship, as a way to increase your competitive advantage. How do we change that to start to think, help business students understand that government has a responsible role to set guardrails on the market? Go back to the writing of Adam Smith. Adam Smith was not a laissez-faire capitalist. He really believed strongly in the role of government in the market. And how do we think about the idea of lobbying as a public service, as trying to make a balanced society for everybody and not just for ourselves? Third, we need to include natural and social sciences. Students need to understand the implications of supply chains on the natural world. They need to understand about climate change and how their emissions are causing that within business, how their extraction of natural resources are implicating them. And then fourth, teach systems thinking. Integrate the curriculum. Right now we have the stale curriculum. It hasn't changed for decades. We've cut it into pieces. And we need to start to think more broadly. Our students are much more adept at thinking systemically than we are. Again, feed them. At the end of the day, I'd like us to teach management as a calling or vocation. And that really gets students to think about what is their place? What kind of a business leader do they want to be? What kind of a legacy do they want to leave behind? It goes beyond just adding an ethics course as an elective while the core remains unchanged. It really gets into teaching the whole student, really focusing on an internal examination about where do they want to make a difference in the world? How do they want to use business to do that? And we need to imbue students with a service mindset. Think about teaching management with the same kind of philosophy we teach law students or doctors, to serve society. You can lose your license in medicine if you don't serve society, if you violate that public trust. We don't have that business. We probably shouldn't. But throughout that education process, students in medicine in particular are taught to believe that they are on a grand quest. They are doing something very important. They are in a vocational calling. How do we bring that into management? And really imbuing the students with the idea that with great power that they will possess, both in terms of their position and, let's face it, in terms of the income that they will receive, with that power comes great responsibility. How do we get them to use that to make society better? There's our challenge. Thank you very much.
Andy, thank you so very, very much for these words and for this keynote speak to us, to the Prime community. I have to say I've heard you many times before speak, and I also have to say that every time is a new time, and it's a new way of thinking and new inspirations that you leave with me after I've heard you. So how to make a change to serve society? Asking our students that question, I think, is a truly important one. Thank you so much for your time here with us, and we hope we can draw upon you into the future also. Now it is my pleasure to introduce the multi-stakeholder panel of today. And I will not introduce the panel because that will our moderator, Karen Spence from Hankins School of Economics, where she is the president. Hankins School of Economics has for many years been a devoted, dedicated Prime signatory, and not least under Karen's leadership. So please, Karen, the floor is yours.